when the state catches wind of anti-Donald Trump protest or anti-capitalist, anti-police brutality or whatever protest, I mean, the example Ure used in his article was the Cologne sexual assaults on New Year's.
Yeah.
So the Cologne sexual assaults on New Year's, there was thousands of Arabs in the main city center, hundreds of women getting assaulted, sexually assaulted, touched, abused, and the police failed to make any arrests that night and then claimed they only had 80 officers on site and they didn't notice it. Okay.
And the busiest night of
now,
the year.
A couple weeks later, there was a protest against what had happened, and there was 1,700 protesters and 1,700 cops in full riot gear.
Right.
So this is the response of the state to people who had intentions of peaceful protesting. I think that had they had 50 cops there, things would have been the same. They would have gone to the middle of the square, protested, and gone home, and nothing would have happened. Unless somebody started something with them. Same thing with Donald Trump rallies. The leftists go, they start shit, then something gets out of hand, and it's Donald Trump's fault, not the people that went to, so it's like it's always going to be framed this way. And then the state itself reacts to this right-wing protest with full and overwhelming force, enough to intimidate anybody that was maybe on the fence and crush.
Well, I do think that it actually does. I do think that it actually does intimidate the establishment if we're talking about, the politicians and representatives calling the shots.
Okay, it's possible, but that's also why,
because they're just as scared as mainstream academia representatives. They're all scared of right wing shit because it's our culture right now.
Well,
right,
particularly
but
with what's the situation in Europe, and these fucking EU people and the kebab invasion. I mean, with this particular situation, I think the people in leadership are afraid. They're fucking. They have to know that they're standing in a pool of gasoline right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that,
and I think one of the reasons why in Europe, there's always much more. There's a greater number of law enforcement, typically present during right-wing protests, is because I think people are fully aware that they're synthesizing their own right-wing revolt with the way that they've been handling things, and they feel like maybe it's a matter of time. Maybe they feel like they need to keep a closer eye on the right, because really at the end of the day, the citizens have a library of reasons to start hanging people.
Right, but they have a different system there where you can do these kind of like gatherings and activism and form a party and actually get votes and get a little power for it, where here it doesn't really apply because you can't do that here. I mean, you do demonstrations and they let you do them, or they do what they usually do to a right-wing demonstration is bring out the full force
in
and bring it
America,
down,
protests are not protests. Protests are seen like extracurricular activities.
Right.
They're seen like Boy Scouts getting together and making fires.
Yeah,
right.
That's what protests are like in the United States.
Yeah.
And
in Germany, the Antifa gets state funding, and they're anarchists or whatever. They get state funding, and in the U.S., we see this is Mark Ure's narrative in this article is sort of an extension of a narrative we've been running with, and it's certainly not original to us. Lots of people on the right have been saying this for a while. Is that the leftist agitator protesters are not counterculture. They're not anti-establishment. They're the ones that believe in the establishment doctrines the most. They believe it more than the people in power who might be a little bit cynical. But they believe it. They're the true believers in the actual system, and they go out and they protest because how much they're true believers. The same way the most pious people in like a Protestant town go out and they start scolding everybody else about piety because that's that they want to show that they're the truest believers. It's the same exact kind of phenomena. But I think Ure's take. I mean, I guess if you didn't read the article, I guess maybe it's hard to understand what his point was getting at. But his point was getting at sort of like it's like they're gonna come down. Like they're coming down on your activism it's like activisms aren't equal, right? Yeah. So it's not like, hey, look, the left went out and did street demonstrations and now they're in power. Mm-hmm. He's saying the street demonstrations are not how the left gained power. The street demonstrations were the left already like waving its
a byproduct
that it had won. And you could even say this in relation to like the 1960s, which people will paint it as, oh no, like civil rights and all of these protesting and all this stuff, you know, for equal rights and all this crap. This was challenging this racist system, but it wasn't. Because remember, the North had already conquered the South 100 years before. They had already tried to do Reconstruction once. Civil rights was essentially the second Reconstruction. So it was once again the powerful flexing their muscles on the relatively less powerful. So it's like, it's not like Bull Connor, like the sheriff, was like, you know, doing these evil things, treating the blacks bad and whatever. But it's like, Bull Connor was the one that was being attacked by really the Yankee establishment. So it's not so much like, you know, it's like the fact that they were even having these protests, that this was even erupting and the fire hoses were being used and all this crap. The left had already won for these things to happen. These things did not create civil rights for blacks had been decided on. They had been decided on amongst the northern elites. And this was just getting it done. And it's like some ways they wanted images of, you know, blacks being sprayed with fire hoses while protesting, because that makes everyone, oh my God, look at these people, they're terrible. They're not understanding at all the social dynamics that are going on down in the South. So for us, now we could say maybe it would be beneficial to have images of right-wingers protesting against rape and getting beaten by the cops, because maybe that would open up sympathy to us, but it won't. Because the media will simply portray this as police beat down Nazis, no matter what.
Yeah. Did you see they brought out firehouses in Brussels? I mean, and that was broadcast on every news station here, and it was like practically celebrated. It was like, wow, look at this. Those evil nativists are being blasted just like the blacks got it in the 60s. It's wonderful.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it'll ignite these revenge fantasies even.
Yeah.
The media definitely, plays a role in all this whole calculation. I mean, the police want to, before they take action, they want to know that you know, when the 11 o'clock news comes on, that the people they're seeing, you know, beating the fuck out of and jailing are not sympathetic figures, and they know that the media will take care of that for them.
Well, Mike, it reminds me of one of the reasons why it's really interesting to see the left with their ethics, the way that your ethical values completely 110% just removed the moment you're labeled fascist completely. Yes, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for the left to be able to say everything is Hitler, is because they've been conditioned their whole life to believe that this is how things are ethically supposed to happen. Like if you see fascism, the worst thing you could ever possibly do is not freak out like a child. Like you have to shut it down. Actually, you have to. All the and it's permissible to do anything at all to anyone who identifies as fascist or is even maybe remotely, you know, heading toward that path. It's a-okay to kill them. It's a-okay to do anything you possibly could ever
starve their children.
Yeah, you can do anything you want.
Yeah. Meow Blitz, what do you got?
Oh no, I was just gonna say the point that Mike was making about how all these protests are occurring after the left gets in power. That would actually be a really interesting subject to study in other areas of the world as well. The most obvious example that comes to my mind was in Maoist China with the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, well, wait a minute. Mao's in power. He controls the country, although he had driven it to ruin. I mean, there were parts of the country that didn't even function at that point. But his whole thing was, we're being destroyed by these capitalist imperialists who are, you know, the capitalist rotors within our own system. So we have to rebel against our own selves, you know, and they make this big protest and millions of people die. And it's like, you know, it's kind of like, it's like a show. So that's very much what these protests are. It's a show to trick people into thinking that, you know, they're actually, you know, making a difference.
It's all a show, man.
Well, this is also... It's sort of like permanent revolution as well, right? Like the Bolsheviks the Bolsheviks come to power, but there's still bourgeoisie out there, and if they're not in power, then they're out there, and we got to get revenge on them. So it's like it's sort of the same thing. It's like there's always more kulaks to kill, right? Like there's always more. And that's what that's what leftist protesting is about. It's about it's about hunting down and finding the very last, Nazi concentration camp guard, the very last kulak, the very last whatever it is.
Yeah, which makes it particularly interesting that now it's like when we talk about racism and all that, how the narrative has changed from racists are out there. Here's our these are racist organizations. Let's go get them. To now it's this. Racists are everywhere and nowhere. You might be a racist. Who knows? We need to keep an ever vigilant eye. We need to do whatever we can to suppress it at all times. It's because there's nothing. It's completely fighting a ghost army.
Have you ever talked to an old 68 or an old hippie who went to protest and thinks that they were really changing the world? Man,
oh God!
Have you ever talked to anybody like that?
See those all the time.
Yeah, and then they ask you for drugs. Mm-hmm.
I see them. They really pat themselves on the back. I've seen this. They'll just brag about it online. I was there at 68, man. We really changed the world.
They think they stopped the war. And,
they did all these amazing things, and then they talk about how this future generation of people are following in their footsteps. This is retarded.
No, they didn't. I mean, these things had already been decided on. Into the, I remember a guy made the point that that Marty Robbins song, "Ain't I Right," which was the anti-freedom rider song, was banned from the radio in the South. Okay, so this guy writes an anti-freedom rider country song about people from the North coming down in a place when they're none of their fucking business and meddling in things that are none of their concern that they don't understand. And it's banned from the radio in the South. So they already had fucking control.
Yeah.
They're banning songs that would have been very popular with, the blue collar white people in the South because they know that, this would be popular and we have the power to ban it. So we're going to ban it.
I think it's fun that you think that the Northern Yankee establishment, that things exist that aren't their concern, that isn't any of their business. Everything's their business, Mikey. Come on.